Hello and welcome to the Chronic Report. I'm Nicole Stewart-Selleck, and joining me today is Dr. Scott Jensen. Hi, Dr. Jensen. How are you doing today?
I'm doing terrific, Nicole, and thank you for having me on your podcast.
Thank you for joining me. I'm just going to give a little background about you today. You're the founder of the Catalyst Medical Clinic, and it's located in both Chaska and Watertown, Minnesota. The Catalyst Clinic is unique in that its physicians are independent, and their approach is holistic, personalized, and community-focused. In addition to founding the Catalyst Clinic, you are also the author of Relationship Matters. And in this book, you discuss the importance of the patient-doctor relationship. You also have been at the forefront of healthcare reform as a former senator for the state of Minnesota. So welcome, and let's first start with talking a little bit about your book, Relationship Matters. Oh, go ahead.
My book was really the product of a desire to, if you will, capture for patients and physicians to come the richness that can occur when a relationship between patient and physician works. I think perhaps I could never have known how timely the book would be, because the last 5 years with the has indeed fractured a lot of relationships. I think a lot of patients have felt abandoned, and a lot of physicians and providers have felt really put upon by policies in the system. I wanted to let people know that if physicians are indeed willing to step up and be a patient's advocate, that will allow the patient to, over time, develop a level of trust. And that level of trust will be rewarding to a physician, and they will want to advocate all the stronger for a patient. But I think it's important to recognize that it begins with the physician advocating for the patient. It doesn't begin, as it may have in the past, it doesn't begin with the patient being obligated to automatically and initially trust. And I think that's a change. Back in the days of Marcus Welby, when medicine seemed like more of a calling, I think patients did feel more assured that their doctor would be their advocate, and their doctor was worthy of trust right from the get-go. I think that's changed, and that's been a hard change for doctors. And yet, on the other hand, I think it's really sort of a presumption on the part of physicians to think that patients would have the same level of trust as they had in the past, because, quite frankly, an awful lot of physicians don't have the same level of commitment to a calling as they did in the past. Many physicians want bookended shifts. They know when they start, they know when they're done. And when they're done, they want to be done. That's different than what Marcus Welby used to do. So my book was there to say, okay, these are the rich kinds of stories and interactions that you can have as a patient and as a physician. And if you can get to this point, your life will be richer, your healthcare will be better. And I'm real glad that I did it. It was a lot of work, but I'm sure glad I did it.
Yeah, it's an excellent book. I'm curious, you made a great reference to the Marcus Welby mentality. I think we have so many TV shows on everywhere you look, and everything from comedy to very serious dramas, but they really have shaped Americans' minds about what medicine is. And then they go to the hospital and they have these expectations. What do you think the big challenge is for doctors? Most of us going into the clinics, that's our perception of what your life is like, what your challenges are. How realistic is this? And how does this pose challenges for physicians when working with patients?
That's a fascinating question. So in my mind, while you're asking your question, Nicole, I was thinking of several TV shows that have indeed shaped the perception of healthcare. I think of Marcus Welby, as I mentioned, but that was not real sensational. I think of another show, St. Elsewhere, where it was a lot about the ER and how bizarre and things like that. And there's no question. I've practiced medicine long enough, and there are bizarre things. I mean, I have stories, and I shared them, some of them in my book. But
Mm-hmm.
some of those stories they do reflect something that you would never guess. But then you move forward, and there have been other TV doctor shows that have sort of elevated the ruthless process of making diagnosis, but staying distant from the patient.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when you trace it back, you can sort of see that TV and movies have indeed shaped our perception. And I think it's probably a little unrealistic because the lion's share of what I do every day in the office is asking questions, listening to my patients share information, helping them target some of their concerns. Someone will come in and they'll say, "Oh, doc, I've got belly pain." And I say, "Okay, well, let's get a little bit more specific. Where?" And then they'll point. And I say, "How long has it been going on?" And then they'll tell me. And then I'll say, "Is it occasional or is it continuous?" And we just keep going, more and more to narrow the focus. It's relatively mundane at times, but it feels a little bit like being a private eye. You
Mm-hmm.
just have to keep asking questions. I know that one of the chapters in my book was about the challenge young people have to accept the fact that they have idiosyncrasies that they don't understand,
Mm-hmm.
that they may have aspects of their behavior or their thought process that are, to their mind, unbecoming or unsettling. I think that the chapter I'm thinking of was called "Too Much Sanity Can Be Madness."
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that it's important for young people to understand that it's okay to be bizarre and quirky and even a little nerdy. The challenge is for each of us to embrace who we are. And when we do that, what we do is we allow others to be who they are. And that's really a very valuable thing. So I'm pleased that I wrote the book. I think that it does highlight what medicine can be at its best. I think there's a couple of chapters that also sort of highlight where medicine can really fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times people ask me, "Well, what's the best way for me to get a copy of the book?" And quite frankly, the best way to do it is just to call our office number in Watertown at 952-955-1963. 952-955-1963. It's $25, and that includes tax and postage. And you'll be asked to provide a credit card, and then we'll mail it out from there. And typically, I try to sign every book that goes out so that folks can indeed have an autographed copy. And the proceeds of our book go to the food shelf. And that's sort of important to some people and not so important to others. But I really think, Nicole, that where we're at today with our healthcare system being as broken as it is, I mean, someone can go into the hospital, have a 1 hour procedure, stay in the hospital a total of 22 hours, and come out with a bill between $25,000 and $50,000. It doesn't seem like it's grounded in reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we've got challenges coming forward that we need to dissect what we're doing in healthcare and recognize that it is broken. Healthcare in the United States is uniquely expensive and also uniquely driven by testing.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at outcomes, it's not as if we stand at the top of the heap. There's many first world countries that exceed the United States healthcare system in regards to some of the classic metrics: lifespan, neonatal death rate, level of hospitalization, number of medications, percentage of the gross national product being spent on healthcare. In all of those areas, we do not fare that well.
Mm-hmm. Why has it gotten so complicated? It seems that, there's a lot of red tape people have to go through just to get treatment and referrals and whatnot. And, we're getting money taken out of our income, many of us, for, insurance plans to ensure we're getting good quality care. And a lot of times we get denied. Yet everything is so expensive. And, I think a lot of people have a question in their mind of, what's happening? Where is the money going? Why is it so expensive? And why is it so hard to get the kind of treatment we need? Do you have any insights on that?
That's a big question. I would highlight a couple areas.
Sure.
One is, I think that the third party payer changes the relationship between patient and doctor.
Mm.
In other words, with a third party payer involved, the patient might have less inclination to find out what it's going to cost beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
The physician may have less inclination to wonder if the price that's being charged is a fair price. Instead, physicians oftentimes don't have any idea what the dollar amount is, and it's really more about checking the boxes. So if I see a patient on the top half of our charge slip, we have to charge a code. And on the bottom half of the page, we have to identify a diagnosis code or a set of codes that justify the charge. And so I'm never really seeing real numbers. I remember one time I saw a patient and they came in and they were a cash paying patient. They had no insurance. And I froze a wart. And a month later, I got a phone call from the patient. And this patient was very respectful and very kind and very much appreciated the relationship we had. But the patient was astonished that the 3-minute office call that we had and the freezing of the single wart was $300 or something like that. I'm just guessing what the
Right.
approximate number was. And I remember feeling bad about it. And I said, well, we'll adjust that. I had no idea. Now, that $300 charge, if that patient had had insurance, might well have been negotiated down to $100 by the patient's insurance company. But that patient was on the hook for the whole thing. And so I think that's one of the problems in our healthcare system is third-party payers disrupt the physician from having a sense of reality in terms of what we're charging and what really should the charge be. And the patient having a responsibility to ask before they say, well, I'd like this done. And by the way, could I have this? And I'd like this pill. And oh, I had no idea, doctor, that would cost me $20,000 a year. So the third party payer really corrupts the transactional relationship that typically had gone on between healer and patient in the past. And I think another area of inflationary driving force, other than the third party payer, would be the middleman. And I think whether the middleman is the pharmacy benefit manager, whether it's, if you want to, you could include the third party payer in that situation. It might be an insurance subunit that decides whether or not they're going to approve the doctor's order for a CAT scan or for a lab test or for an echocardiogram. All of those elements distance the patient from the physician. And so people once again are left with checking boxes and charging codes rather than dollar amounts. And oftentimes the doctor doesn't really think about the fact that this patient might be getting paid $20 an hour at their job. And in an 8-hour day, they make $160 minus taxes and Social Security and things like that. And a brief office visit to have a sore throat evaluated might well exceed all that they made in a given day's wages. And that's sad. So I really think that we're going to have to wrestle with this. I don't think doctors are going to stand in line asking for lower compensation packages. And I don't think patients are going to stand in line so that they can confront the person they're leaning on to help them get better. But somehow we're going to have to take on the challenge.
How much of an impact do, for instance, the insurance policy, or not policies, what do I want to say? Insurance guidelines. How much does this impact patient care? You know, we hear stories about people being denied procedures, that sort of thing. Is it as simplistic as what most people think of on the other side, or is it a little more complicated when people get denied coverage for certain procedures, or they feel like they're not getting what they need? How often are people being funneled into something that maybe isn't quite what they need, but it's what's covered, so they're going to take it?
It might not be quite as simplistic as some patients might think, but at the end of the day, there is a fair simplicity about it. I mean, we get denials. I got a denial not too long ago where I had wanted to do an MRI of a patient because they were having severe headaches. Mm-hmm. And it was denied by the insurance company. So we called and talked, and they said, well, has the patient had headaches for 6 weeks? No, but this is a patient who's healthy, doesn't come in very often, has a severe headache for 3 weeks, and has tried Tylenol and ibuprofen and a variety of other measures, including acupuncture, and has gotten no relief at all. It seems to be getting worse. They've had nausea with it. A couple of times they've thrown up. There's no specific trigger identified in regards to trauma. Mm-hmm. I think 6 weeks is arbitrary and inappropriate in this situation. Mm-hmm. And they say, well, these are our standards. Now, in that situation, it's pretty darn simplistic. This patient's insurance was denying the patient an MRI until they'd had symptoms for 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. And I think that that does happen with some frequency. Sometimes we'll find that the test that we think is most ideal to help us diagnose something might be denied, but maybe we can come up with something else that would still help. And so sometimes we'll get approval for an ultrasound, but not an MRI. And I grant you, an ultrasound can be helpful. But from a patient's perspective, they're worried about a stroke or a cancer or something like that. And it's pretty darn frustrating. And oftentimes the physician feels like they're caught in the middle. And they sort of want to tell the patient, hey, you're the one who chose your insurance plan. I had nothing to do with that. I'm here to help you. And I didn't write your insurance plan. I had nothing to do with it. I'm not necessarily pleased with the level of reimbursement I'm getting from your insurance. And frankly, what can I do? And I think that that kind of a conversation, it needs to happen because we need to understand one another.
Do you think patients is it a thing of they don't know to ask these questions, or do you think that it's a little bit of naivety?
Both.
Yeah.
Both.
Yeah. What about pharma? What impact does pharma have? We talked about insurance and third-party payers. What about pharma's impact on patient care and the patient-doctor relationship?
Well, I think it's really important to be thoughtful in answering that question. First off, at a very simplistic level, you could say that what a physician offers a patient is information, which would include education, perhaps a procedure such as injecting a knee with cortisone, a medication, or a surgery. And that's sort of our set of tools. We're very grateful in the world of allopathic medicine to have many medications that are just game changers for patients. 120 years ago, the leading cause of death was influenza and pneumonia as a category. And a lot of that was because people would get sick with influenza, and the influenza would weaken the person to the point where they would develop a pneumonia, and the pneumonia would kill them because we didn't have antibiotics. Now we've got dozens and dozens and dozens of antibiotics. And having someone die of bacterial pneumonia is the exception rather than the rule. So I'm very grateful as a physician for the contributions pharma has made. I think that we have a whole host of chronic diseases, such as hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, elevated cholesterol, arthritis, all kinds of chronic things. And patients want, in some situations, symptomatic relief. And physicians want, in some situations, to know that they're doing what they can to reduce the likelihood that these chronic problems are going to continuously cause the patient more and more damage and more problems. Mm-hmm. So I think we have this whole cottage industry in medicine of chronic disease management. Mm-hmm. And that's where pharma has really stepped in. And I think they've become extremely ingenious at almost guilting patients and doctors alike to take more and more pills. And I think our studies more and more are being driven by pharmaceutical grants that researchers really don't want to disappoint the source of funds that they have for their research because they want to do more research next year. And I think that's where things have really gotten blown out of whack. And we saw, I mean, I think we've seen become a small cottage industry in and of itself within the overarching pharmaceutical industry. It used to not be the holy grail for pharmaceutical companies. They were looking for a new molecule. They were looking for something that would cure diabetes or cure rheumatoid arthritis. Well, now have become a real goose that lays the golden eggs for a lot of pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
And when you take away their potential liability, if there's downside on effects from them, now you've really opened up Pandora's box. And I think that's what's happened. So I think that now we have this overabundance of pharmaceutical products. And then you add to it the very elegant and crafty direct-to-consumer marketing that we see on TV.
Right.
And patients now are going on Monday or Tuesday morning to see their doctor and say, hey, doc, I got to have me some of this because I just saw in the halftime football game that they've got a drug that can cure me of my memory loss.
Right.
I say, well, it's not quite that simple. And so I think that, as with so many things, there's a two-edged sword to pharma. And I think perhaps the real Machiavellian thing that has happened is that pharmaceutical companies have become one of the largest, if not the largest, sources of political contribution, such that our politicians and legislators are not inclined to bite the hand that feeds them. So we have pharma sort of running loose in the wild, wild west kind of scenario, and politicians and legislators are saying, hey, that area is hands off. We're not going to cut into them and make them upset because we want their dollars when it comes time to run for re-election.
Right. I think it doesn't help either. You know, we live in a fast food world where people want instant gratification. And I bet you deal with a lot of patients who would rather take a pill than do the work. For instance, you know, people dealing with cholesterol issues, you know, or diabetes, managing it with diet doesn't sound as appealing as, you know, a pill. I don't know if you would agree with that, but that's what it seems to me.
I think you're very right, Nicole. And I think underneath your comments there is something else that needs to be divulged. And that would be that I think sometimes patients feel like their agenda in the doctor's office somehow becomes subordinate to the doctor's agenda. So the patient's not really expecting to be cured of some of the things they ask about.
Right.
But who would they ask if not their doctor? I had a case in point this morning in the office. The patient said, Doc, I know this is really stupid, but, you know, would you feel this lump? And I said, sure. And I felt a lump, and it was nothing more than a cyst in the skin. And I reassured the patient And the patient said, thanks. Now, then the patient went on and had another thing, and he wanted me to look at his toenail. And then another. But each one of these things took 30 seconds. It was no big deal. Because who better to ask than me?
Right.
But from the physician side of the equation, the doctor is feeling like each one of these concerns or complaints has to be categorized and documented, or they're potentially at risk for not being thorough, not satisfying the administration, potentially putting themselves at harm's way in case that toenail ends up being a really bad thing and the patient does poorly and loses their toe, and then the doctor will get sued. And you've got these conflicting agendas. And so some doctors will say to the patient, I will deal with 3 issues and that's it. And the patient's thinking, well, that seems pretty arbitrary. I mean, I've got 10 things on my list and I don't care if you document them or not. I'm not asking for a cure. And each one of these will probably take 20 seconds, which is a total of 200 seconds, which is 3.5 minutes. Can I have 5 minutes of your time where you don't document anything, but you can just teach me? These are the kind of conversations that have to happen.
It sounds like, or at least the nuggets I took away from your book, Relationship Matters, is that well, first of all, I want to say your book was very visionary. You're very prophetic and, what's finally coming to fruition. You wrote the book in 2015, I believe. And now here we are. A lot of the things you were warning about in that book are happening. And it seems to me your book is an appeal to both doctors and patients to be grassroots about their health care, to take matters into their hands, because perhaps if they don't, that was the warning then, they might lose some of their, I don't know if we want to call it health freedom, but the ability to collaborate and come up with a really good medical plan that best serves the interests of the patient and helps the doctor. What do you have to say about where we're at and where we came from? And do you feel like the things that you bring up in your book are still valid points, or have things changed even more than what you even predicted?
I'm absolutely a believer in that old adage that says you can't solve a problem until you at least identify it. And I would say that once you identify a problem, you really are not likely to solve it until you do a fair amount of listening and do some in-depth learning. And that's where we're at, I think. I think people get a little pessimistic about the likelihood for solving the problem. I'm not. I think we can solve the problem. But if we have to couch our words and couch our conversations in politically correct language, it's going to take a lot longer to get there. If we can try to be kind and try to be civil and try to be appreciative of one another, but allow each other some latitude to express from the heart what they see as problematic and what they see as important, then I think we can get there. But I don't think that's happening. And I think that we're sliding more and more into a quagmire that is less likely to allow us to get to a solution. Let me just remind you that literally less than 100 years ago, many physicians and medical schools were seen as charlatans. The profession of medicine really became steeped in respect and almost a reverence for what physicians could do when we had antibiotics in the 1940s available to cure pneumonia, when we began to be able to do surgery without a significant risk of infection or complication, when we could transplant hearts and kidneys and corneas, when we could fix broken bones and replace destroyed joints. When we could do these things, people started to elevate the practice of medicine. I think it's terribly important for people to recognize that the problems that we're so aware of today have really only been a part of our societal framework for about 60 years. For about 60 years. So do I think that we can solve the problem? Absolutely. But I don't really think that politicians are inclined to, because they're always so darn careful. And I don't think the people that are feeding at the trough of healthcare dollars want to, because it's pretty lucrative. And I think it's the patient who's left suffering and wondering, how can I just get reasonable, thoughtful healthcare where I have a conversation with my physician that doesn't seem to be polarizing or clashing?
Yeah, they're it's really hard. I think there aren't a lot of arenas where people can have this discussion, especially in the last 4 to 5 years. I think it's gotten very difficult to have discussions about medicine in general, let alone, advocacy or anything like that.
Let me give you an
Um,
example of that, Nicole.
yeah.
The other day, I had a new patient came in, and they're driving like an hour to see me. And I said, gee whiz, I said, you passed a lot of clinics on the way. Why'd you come here? Well, I'm sick and tired of going to doctors. And the patient said, I'm not a difficult patient to take care of. And I'm not expecting the world from you. But I have gone to numerous clinics between my home and your clinic, and I feel bullied when I go in, when 6 or 7 times I will be reminded by the physician that I didn't do this test, or I didn't get this procedure done, or I should take this. And they say, I made my decision. I respectfully declined. It's time to move on to what I want to talk about. And the physician is absolutely belligerent. To me, that kind of behavior on the part of the healer is just almost unimaginable. But it's a reality. It's a reality for patients today, without question.
It's true. Let's talk about Catalyst Clinic and what inspired you, because to me, this is one solution. We're fortunate here in Minnesota to have your clinic. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the philosophy behind it and how it came about?
Catalyst was basically founded wanting to serve as a catalyst for patients to feel like they could be their own best champion. I think that oftentimes we think of this vertical relationship where the physician's up here and the patient's down here. That's crazy. I like to think of the metaphor where each one of us human creatures on earth, every day we wake up and we sort of got to get into the ring of life. We get into the boxing match with the challenges and the hassles and all the things that we have to deal with in a given day. And during that process, we might end up getting a nosebleed. We might end up getting a cut. We need a physician to help patch us up, lower our blood pressure, help us with our chest pain, make us mentally more comfortable. What we do is we walk over to the corner where the trainer is. And the trainer is the physician or the provider. And that provider may be all sorts of different kinds of backgrounds. It might be a physician, but it could be a chiropractor, a naturopath, an acupuncturist, a body trainer, a coach. It could be so many things. But to me, that's the relationship we have to have. It's about the patient making the decision, I need some help. I'm going over to the corner. I've got someone waiting to help me. That's what it should be. It's not that. Catalyst has said, we are not going to be the top of the heap. You are going to be. I have rejected patients who wanted me to take care of them because I've told them, you make it very clear that you're not willing to be your own best champion. You make it very clear that you want to come here and you want to dump your bucket on my lap and say, fix it. And I said, there's no easy fix. And I can feel it. I can feel the chemistry. All of a sudden, It's my obligation to fix it. I'm not God. I'm not that good. An awful lot of these things that patients want to be fixed of, no easy fix. We can have a conversation. We can work together. But if a patient isn't willing to take the lead on championing their own healthcare, there's a very good likelihood that I'm probably not their ideal physician.
It's so interesting. This gets back to that point I made earlier about the McDonald's mentality on the part of patients when it comes to medicine. I think a lot of people want easy, and that's such a foreign concept, I think, for so many people. Collaborating, I mean, real collaboration with a doctor and having a real adult conversation talking about their healthcare. In some ways, I kind of feel like it's because of the way things have kind of evolved and what the typical, patient doctor experience is like when you go into a clinic. Everything's on a very tight schedule. You've got 15 minutes to get everything done and then you're out. How do we get people to the point where they change their thinking and they understand that there is this option out there? I know there's probably other clinic. I am actually seeing it. Actually, more and more clinics are starting to, go out of network and go independent and create atmospheres where patients have a lot more say in their daily care, very much like Catalyst Clinic. But by and large, I think it's still a foreign idea for people. How do we get that messaging or idea across to the average person, average patient out there so they can start thinking that way and thinking about self-advocacy?
Well, having conversations like this certainly helps. But I don't think that the point in the future where we've solved some of our current problems and we've hopefully made our healthcare system better, wherever that point is in the future, I don't think it's going to happen because we somehow found a way to successfully untangle a patient's confused thinking. Because I don't think patients are confused. I think the system is. And I think patients feel boxed in. I don't think that a patient who's got a bruise on their arm, a toenail that's a little distorted, a hangnail on their other hand, a chronic cough, and an occasional runny nose, and wants to have a discussion of all 5 of those issues in a 10-minute block of time is being unreasonable. But I think the system is fracturing that relationship between the patient and the doctor such that it feels in opposition. The doctor feels like the patient's just dumping their bucket. The patient's saying, I just need 1 minute of your time on each one of these 5 issues. That's 5 minutes, doc. Can you give me 5 minutes? The doc says, I've got a document after you leave, and it's going to take me 5 minutes on each one of these darn problems because I got to do it right. And I got to include a history that has a chief complaint, a review of systems, a history of the present illness, and I got to do this and this and everyone. That's 25 more minutes after you leave. And we didn't even get to the fact that I want to talk about your diabetes, your hypertension, and the fact that you had a stroke a year ago. This is what's happening. Our system is broken. Insurance is to blame. Third parties are to blame. Malpractice lawyers are to blame. Doctors are to blame. The system is to blame. But frankly, the patient is the least to blame. So the answer is not going to be by untangling patients' confused thinking. Patients are not confused.
I think that there's some big change going on. We've had a lot of stuff in the news, positive and negative. In the negative, the recent shooting of the CEO from United Health. And then in the positive, the incoming presidential administration is making chronic illness a priority for the years to come. I feel like, or it seems to me, my observation is that the shooting is symptomatic of a roiling dissatisfaction and awareness, a growing keen awareness amongst the general public about the state of healthcare. I think people are starting to wake up and they don't know what it is that they want. The response to the shooting on social media was shocking, I think, to some, maybe not to others, but people were supporting the shooter. And people were voicing a lot of frustration and anger about past treatment as a result of the system. And then in the same time, we have this new administration coming in with, promises to tackle and look into a lot of these problems. Um, do you feel that this juncture that we're at is going to move toward the positive, and we're going to actually start seeing reform because there's a convergence of, a possibility of change at the government level, as well as a grassroots movement amongst people who are starting to get more aware? Or do you think we are at risk of things maybe not getting better and maybe going backwards?
I think our healthcare system is failing, and I think it's going to get worse.
Okay.
I think that the death of the United Health Group individual, United Healthcare individual, is a tragedy, an absolute tragedy. A family has been shattered. I don't understand how anybody could see otherwise. I think that the shooter suffers from some mental health challenges that I'm not privy to. I think there should be an immediacy in the world of politics and legislation about getting serious and fixing our healthcare, because we may well see adjustments made to the various thresholds for qualifying for various medical assistance and Medicare programs, as well as insurance programs, and the various threshold metrics in terms of deductibles and family deductibles and copays and coinsurances. And all of these may be intensifying patients' frustration. I actually think that's quite predictable that that's going to happen. So I think generally politicians don't lead on something like this. On challenging issues, oftentimes they will lag behind because they're frightened of what it will do to their future political career.
Okay.
And so I think that it would be somewhat unusual for politicians to lead on this tough issue.
Okay.
Patients will have to be vociferous and express their discontent. And even then, it's going to be a slow process. And I find that very sad.
Yeah.
And I do think that we can do a lot better. And I think there's an answer out there. But for me to express a certain dismal and pessimistic prophecy is not who I normally am.
Yeah.
But this issue is so critical and so broken and so much going in the wrong direction that I don't see how it does anything other than intensify.
Wow. Well, I can honestly say I'm surprised by the answer. I probably naively thought maybe we're turning the corner, with talk about the MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again. I think a lot of people are very optimistic about that. But it sounds like our problem's a lot bigger and deeper than
Well, let me
we might
inject one
realize.
thing.
Yeah.
Let me inject one thought there, Nicole. I think a lot of people, myself included, are excited about the MAHA in part because we're going to see some basic tenets of health freedom
Okay.
become more assertive and authoritative in our healthcare system, which I think is important.
Okay.
I think we might see a trickle-down theory taking place where some of the research that's done might be a little less slanted towards trying to achieve an outcome that pushes more pills. I think that people are excited that trying to identify within our food chain and our lifestyles
Right.
some core causative elements is exciting to people. But I don't think it's fair to Bobby Kennedy and anybody else that's involved in the administration's work on the United States healthcare system to expect them to wave a wand and fix it. Because there's going to be hard realities for everybody involved on both sides of the equation. Patients are going to need to learn that some of the symptoms and medical problems that they prioritize as a very high level issue, they may need to know that there's nothing we can do.
Yeah.
And physicians may need to learn that their role is going to be revised because, quite frankly, if a physician is of the mind that every problem that is voiced by the patient is somehow going to take up an unacceptable chunk of time for that physician, there needs to be a reset.
Right.
I think it's really hard for young doctors because I think young doctors are pummeled by their residency programs and attendings to document thoroughly. I can have a patient go to some clinics with nothing more than an isolated sore throat with no fever. It's been present for 2 days. They wanted to know if they had strep. The strep skin comes back negative. They've got a viral upper respiratory infection. Gargled, take some Tylenol, push fluids. It'll be gone in 2 or 3 days. And I will get from that clinic 8 to 10 pages, single spaced, filled with garbage and filled with medical information that isn't even true. It'll say things like the patient says that they're safe at home, but they have guns in the house. They went to the doctor or the clinic because they had a sore throat.
Yeah.
We've lost our minds that way.
Yeah. So then what do you recommend? In addition to, the things you suggest in your book, are you also recommending then that people become more civically minded and involved at the legislative level of their state? Or what should people be thinking as we get ready to go into a new administration?
Everybody wants a 3-bullet answer to a complex question. I get that. So I'll try my best.
Sorry about that.
1, be your own best champion. 2, engage conversation. You don't get to sit in the cheap seats and just whine about it. Get in the arena, ask your candidates, whether they're running for the House or the Senate or whatever, ask your candidates and keep on asking. And 3rd, bring a certain dose of reality to your own healthcare picture. If you're 70 years old like I am last month, acknowledge the fact that you've lived more than 2/3 of your life. Acknowledge the fact if you're 40 pounds overweight, you've tried 14 different diets and you've failed every time, there's a darn good likelihood you're going to fail another 14 times, and you should quit whining about your weight. Either live with it as it is or do something about it, but quit dumping your bucket on the doctor in the office because they can't do anything about it either. So that's your 3-bullet answer. Be your own champion, acknowledge the reality of your healthcare situation, and whatever the 3rd one was I mentioned. That's what's the problem about a 3-bullet answer. Is you're thinking about the 4th and the 5th bullet. You're trying to keep your answer abbreviated. But the bottom line is I think we do need to recognize that we have a reality we have to live with. The doctor's not going to be able to fix it. And physicians are going to have to participate. But these are complex problems.
It is. It is very complex. Well, I'm not sure how you're doing on time. Are you able to answer any more questions, or?
I do need to go. I have a Zoom call coming up. So let me just close with this, Nicole.
Sure.
This conversation that you and I have today, it's not going to lend itself for a listener to a 2-minute summary.
Right.
Hopefully what it'll do is help the listener recalibrate a little bit and recognize that there's a reality and that there's a hoped for approach to the future. And maybe we've highlighted some of the specific elements of dysfunction in our broken healthcare system. But it is true that so many people want a 2-minute crib note
Yep.
answer. And if people listen to this conversation from start to finish, I'm hoping that they'll take away a little bit of comfort in knowing that here's two people having a conversation and we can find an awful lot of agreement and common ground, even though our backgrounds are different.
Yeah.
That we can have this kind of conversation without demonizing one party or the other.
Right.
It isn't about a blame game. There's reason for optimism, but there's also reason for realistic pessimism. And these are the kind of conversations that have to keep on happening. And at the end of the day, this is why we need to, at times, be willing to elect candidates who may not have the answers, who may not be exactly the clone of who you are ideologically, but maybe what they are more than anything else is willing to be a disruptor so that we can finally get to the conversation that needs to take place so that, to use your word, we can collaborate and we can move the needle. I think that's the best that people might come away with from our conversation. Nicole, I really do appreciate your thoughtful and insightful questions. And who knows, perhaps we'll have another conversation down the line. And I certainly hope that Dr. Patrick Lynch is feeling better. And please greet him for me.
I will do that. And I appreciate this so much. It was wonderful. And I would love to have more future conversations. Thank you very much, Doctor.